Well, hello neighbors, John, your whiskey neighbor here, and today I'd like to talk to you about, well, I guess it's about flavored whiskey, sort of. Certainly this bottle that's up front, this is Wiser's Hopped Whisky. It's a Canadian whiskey that's been exposed to hops. So I'll tell you what I think after the break. All right, thanks for staying with me. So you can see I've got three bottles, all of which are beer influenced or hop influenced. I've got JP Wiser's Hopped Whisky. Then I've got a hopped whiskey, BC hopped whiskey from Okanagan Spirits, craft distillery in BC. And then I've got the IPA experiment from Glenfiddich. I'm going to talk a bit about each because I think it's a good way to talk about how whiskey picks up, or some of the way, or something that whiskey picks up flavor. But it will also be a review of this one because I've already reviewed those two over there. So I'm going to first start with the JP Wiser. So JP Wiser is Canadian, right? It's made in here in Walker. And then this, I think, came out, 2015-ish, I think it came on the scene. Looking at the bottle, it doesn't tell you too much. It just says JP Wiser's Hopped Whisky Dark Ale Style, bottle at 40%. And that's pretty much all it tells you. Yeah, a little bit about beer and whiskey and how they can go together. I've done a little bit of research in here, and as I have read on several decent sites, right, like CanadianWhiskey.org that Davin DeCurgamo puts together, Distiller.com, I use that app. It mentions a little bit about the process too. And then, you dig around on a few other sites. JP Wiser has their own site a little bit about this. So I think the way this is made is in their typical whiskey style. So they distill their corn. What would they use in this one? Probably corn, wheat, and rye. No, yeah, probably. There might be barley in there. So I don't really know the mash bill. But I will say here in Walker, we'll distill each of their grains separately. They do corn, they do wheat, they do rye, they do barley. Then they age them. And then they choose how old the barrels are. And then they blend them, vat them for some time, bottle them, and release them. This one is using whiskeys between 5 and 7 years old, which is nice because when you get a flavored whiskey, you might think this is like a young, just barely make it 3 years, add some kind of flavoring to it. But in this case, they take a little bit older, so 5 to 7 year old whiskey. They don't release the blend ratios, but it's probably going to have, I know it has corn in it just from the flavor, and maybe a little bit of rye. I don't know whether it's wheat or barley in there as the other grain. And then before they bottle it, so after maturation, Dr. Don Livermore decided to do hopping then. So it's exposure to hops. It's called dry hopping. So it's really at the end of kind of almost all the process. Then you put in some hops. I've forgotten what the hops are with this one. And hopefully retain, especially some of the floral citrus notes, and then bottle it. So that's how this bottle gets its flavor. I'll talk about those a little bit later, but that's this bottle. I'll talk to you about the whiskey. Let's give it a smell. So on the nose, big caramel, sugar, burnt sugar, toffee, a little bit of a floral note to it in that, when I say floral, sometimes that edge of perfumey. But really, that caramel, butter, candy comes very quick in the nose. Maybe a little malty. I'm reaching for citrus, but it's not hitting me right away. But definitely, if you've had good Canadian whiskey, it's got a lot of what we associate with Canadian whiskey, that sweetness, that maple sugar, but a little darker, a little more burnt. Yeah, and if I stay with it, like, yeah, that edges of burnt. It's a little chemically, a little bit maybe I would say. So I don't know if that's young or, but yeah, a little bit on that edge. Nice nose. Let's give it a taste. In the mouth, coating, sweet again. Now definitely some chocolate or maybe light coffee, not a strong coffee, but a little bit of coffee maybe. Continued caramel. Oh, and there, near the end of the finish isn't long, but the way it changes in your palate, I'm getting a cocoa. I described it yesterday as like a Tootsie Roll. You know, that you got the vanillas, sugar for sure, but cocoa. Yeah, now I'm getting it in, like, I guess this is the finish, but it seemed to go away pretty quick. But now that I'm letting it be in my mouth, definitely that cocoa, like Tootsie Roll. I honestly, for me, I can't get that out of my head. It's exactly what I'm tasting. So very sweet on the nose, not that floral that I was thinking with all that hopping. Is there grassy notes? A little bit. So I very much tend to, and this will bring into the next discussion here, to pretty much avoid what I would call flavored whiskeys. And I have to admit, this would be considered a flavored whiskey. Because really, when I want to make a cocktail or a special drink, I think, well, we should be in control of that, whether we want to add the honey or, add whatever sugars or bitters or other things to create a unique drink. That's cool. But I really believe the art of whiskey making is in, choosing the grain, the distilling, and then the aging and the different wood. Oh, I should say, the oak behind this one. I don't know in ratios or whatnot, but I know the whiskey in here has gone through, ex-Canadian, ex-bourbon, so kind of well-used barrels, but also some new oak. You'll notice in my description, though, really tends towards those chocolates, maybe a little coffee and that kind of thing, more than oaky, woody. I'm surprised to hear that this has had some new oak, but it's been in those three. I don't know the ratios, but those three, ex-Canadian, ex-bourbon, and some new oak. Boy, the chocolate notes now in that lingering finish, I guess, are just continuing to evolve. Really, really strong. So as I was saying with Flavoured, this one gets away with being in my closet, I think, because they didn't, I feel like it was still a natural processing, right? They made their whiskey the way they wanted to, and then they do that dry hopping and then bottling it. And I feel like, yes, that is flavoring the whiskey. Absolutely, exposure to hops is flavoring, but it's kind of still feels a little bit earthy or authentic. They're not adding a flavorant to it, and so I'm okay with it. I think this would appeal to many people that really aren't into, well, I won't say into whiskey. It's definitely a whiskey, but because of the high sweetness, strong chocolates, deep caramels, burnt sugars, there's enough layers and stuff to keep people interested. It's fairly soft, bottled at 40%, and I think it would have a pretty broad appeal. Really, people that like cocktails or mixes, I think it would appeal to those. Those that are looking for really more of a purist whiskey expression, I think would soon feel this is a flavored sweet whiskey, and it would start to put them off a little bit. Tough to come up with a star rating for me. I actually kind of like the flavors. I think I'll enjoy, drinking this bottle. Well, I know I do. So, it's easily 3.5 for me. It could even be more, which is interesting because it's really a rather inexpensive bottle. And it's certainly not, a connoisseur whiskey by any means. It's a flavored whiskey, but it drinks well. So I wanted to compare it to some of the other hopped whiskeys that I have in the cabinet. So the next one quite a while ago, I went to Okanagan Spirits, and they're in Vernon, and this is bottled at 42%. I know it's basically a mix of corn and barley, local barley, which is quite nice. I don't know whether they color it or not. It's a deeper color than the hopped whiskey, but they go through sort of a mashing process, and then before they distill it, they put in, I know they use Cascade hops, and so they put it in earlier in the process than Wiser's. It was the dry hopping. Give it a quick nose. This is a radically different whiskey. On the nose, this one to me, very citrusy, malt sugar forward. Yeah, lemon. That herb note is much sooner. Sugars are way in the background, at least on the nose. Give it a taste. This one's actually benefited from being just opened and sat for probably about half a year, a little more even, because right away it is a little younger. It's a little sharper, a little tart. The citrus in the nose turns into not a poor sour, but just on that edge. What is that? It is still quite nice in the mouth, but almost has that cola taste, you know, where the sugars are toward a cola note. And I would say, yeah, if I'm thinking about a beer, this would be a creamy, older, something kind of beer. This is closer to that IPA, that sharper, definitely like bitter, hoppy. But the whole thing isn't very bitter. I'm just saying it tends toward that, yeah. A little bit of spice, a little bit of cinnamon now back on the nose, but sharper, citrusy, that kind of thing. I don't know how to put the bottle where it's not right in my face. So that was, this first one we looked at, hopped right at the end, dry hopping. This one hopped before the distillation. Then the last one comes from Glenfiddich. Now Glenfiddich, this is a single malt Scotch, so it's 100% barley, all from Glenfiddich Distillery. And I know that they don't hop this at all. Instead, they spent quite a bit of time working with brewmaster. What do you call the people that are awesome and behind beer? I should know that. They worked at getting just the right kind of IPA, and then so they took barrels that had been aging their regular Glenfiddich, and then they gave it to that that local brewery, who filled it with their IPA and then conditioned it outside for, I don't know, like 9 weeks or something like that. And then emptied it and then put their Glenfiddich back in those barrels that were seasoned with the uniquely created IPA beer, and then seasoned it for another length of time in the barrel and took it out. And that's how it might get its hop influence in this case. Because we know IPA beers tend to be very strong and hop very high in that. Well, see, this nose, you wouldn't, I don't think, immediately think hop. Like these two, in different ways you would. You would think beer or hop. Here, takes a little while to get past the general kind of apple, citrus, Speyside Scotch. And if you stay with it, yeah, it's more like a grapefruity citrus instead of the high, sharp lemon. And there's a cereal sweetness to it pretty quick, but it is so radically different from the about half corn, probably mostly corn sweetness that you're getting in both of these. Yeah, nice nose. Give it a taste. So this is more your classic Scotch, and it doesn't really belong in this tasting comparison because the flavor notes, the sweetnesses are honey, the fruits are apples. Yeah, there is maybe a slight bitter. And well, there's a malty sweetness, a sugar that comes from, that I could maybe get into a creamy beer. Maybe I could make that link. But I wanted to put it here just to sort of say, these are different ways that whiskey can pick up their flavor. This one's being exposed to hops very late in the process, and so it definitely has to be labeled a flavored whiskey. This one, because the hopping is done before distilling, I'm not sure if it has to be labeled a flavored whiskey. I know they don't label it that way, but they do say BC Hopped Whisky. They're not trying to hide it. But this one is before the distillation process. And then this last one, really, this is just a cask influence. And we know how many scotches and other whiskeys are really playing with, if we go in X sherry, if we go in X wine, if we go in, in here, it's really X beer barrels, what kind of influence. So it's a nice experiment to see how whiskey picks up its flavor. And definitely, I would say the last one, the IPA experiment, retains far more of the original Glenfiddich than these, which, like, this takes a Canadian whiskey, but it doesn't take long, and I feel like, yeah, there's definitely more flavors going on in here than I would get out of their regular corn, wheat, and rye. And this one is unique. It's craft, and so it really has its own flavor profile really entirely. Thanks for staying with me all the way to the end. I've been looking forward to shooting some kind of discussion about flavored whiskeys, and this just lined up that I had 3 in the stable that were related specifically to beer or hops. Thanks for joining me for this longer shoot. Hope you guys are having a great afternoon and enjoying a little bit of much needed sunshine here in winter. You take care.